I was 34 years old when I learned that the most terrifying thing on a highway at night is not the dark. It is someone standing in it, waving at you to stop. I was driving from Los Angeles to Albuquerque, alone, in my 2019 Subaru Forester on a Saturday night in August 2022. The move had not been planned. My relationship of 4 years had ended in the way that long relationships sometimes end. Not with a single catastrophic event, but with a slow mutual understanding that the thing you built together had quietly stopped working. I packed what would fit in the car, left the furniture for him to deal with, and told myself the 14-hour drive would be a kind of reset. I left at 9:15 at night, because the Mojave Desert in August is not a place you cross in daylight if you have any choice. The first 2 hours were exactly what solo night driving always is. A private kind of peace. The city thinned out past Pomona, and by the time I reached the junction near Barstow, the sky had opened into the particular vastness that only exists in the western desert at night. No light pollution, no horizon, just stars so dense they looked like static. I had a 32-ounce gas station coffee in the cup holder, a playlist I had built for this exact drive, and the low, steady hum of the road that I find, for reasons I have never fully explained to anyone, genuinely calming. I stopped at a pilot travel center just past Barstow around midnight, not because I needed gas, but because I had learned from previous long drives that stopping when you don't need to is better than stopping when you do. I stretched my legs. I walked 2 slow laps around the building in the pool of yellow overhead light. A man in a Freightliner cap sitting on a truck step looked up, nodded once, and looked back at his phone. A woman in hospital scrubs bought a bottle of water at the register and got back in her car without looking at anyone. The parking lot smelled of diesel and hot asphalt and the particular cleanliness of a place that has nothing to hide. I pulled back onto I-40 eastbound 20 minutes later. The Mojave at that hour is not threatening, it is simply indifferent. Mile after mile of dark scrub and pale sand, and the clean certainty of a road going only one direction. For the next 40 minutes, the highway was almost entirely empty, an occasional semi running west in the opposite lanes. Once, a pair of headlights appeared behind me, kept pace for about 10 miles, then took an exit without any announcement. The radio had settled into dead air between stations, a soft, warring static that I found I preferred to either option. Nothing on that stretch of road made me feel anything except tired and adequately awake. I saw her from about a quarter mile out. She was standing on the right shoulder, facing oncoming traffic, waving both arms above her head in wide, slow arcs. She wore a pale shirt, white or close to it, clearly visible against the dark. I lifted my foot off the gas. I did not brake hard. I let the car decelerate naturally, which gave me 10 or 12 seconds to look at her before I would have the point of having to decide. She appeared to be in her 30s, dark hair loose around her face, one arm raised in the wave, and the other held across her midsection in the way people hold an arm that is injured. She was facing my headlights, squinting into them, and her mouth was open. Not screaming, just open. Like someone who has been calling out for a long time and hasn't stopped expecting it to work. I slowed to about 30 miles an hour. I did not stop. Windows up, doors locked. I kept that speed, and I looked. Her feet were clean. That is what stopped me from stopping. She was standing on the gravel shoulder of a desert highway in August at midnight, and her feet looked the way feet look when someone has just stepped off a porch onto swept concrete. And as I passed her, still at 30, still rolling, she glanced, not at me, to her right, into the scrub brush on the dark side of the shoulder. A fast, involuntary glance she couldn't entirely suppress, the kind you give to someone you're waiting for before you mean to. There was someone in the dark to her right. I accelerated. I want to be honest about the next 30 seconds, because I think honesty matters here. I was not completely certain. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself there was an innocent explanation for clean feet on a desert highway at midnight, for the glance into the brush, for all of it. I drove about 2 miles before I called 911. I told the dispatcher what I had seen. I told her about the feet. I told her about the glance. She asked if I was still in the area. I said no. She told me to keep driving and said she was dispatching a unit immediately. I pulled off at the next exit and sat in the parking lot of a shuttered filling station with every door locked and the engine running, watching the westbound lanes. I stayed there for 43 minutes without moving. A San Bernardino County sheriff called me close to 2 in the morning. He asked if I could confirm my exact position when I had seen the woman. I said no. He was quiet for a moment, in the specific way of someone deciding how much to say. Then he said, that was the right call. Officers had found a man in the brush approximately 30 feet off the shoulder at the coordinates I had described. He had a coil of nylon rope and a set of zip ties in a canvas bag. The woman was located further east on the shoulder, unharmed, and was taken in for questioning. The sheriff did not elaborate on her role in what had been planned that night. He said it in a way that elaboration felt unnecessary. He said there had been 3 prior incidents on this stretch of I-40 over the preceding 14 months. In 2 of those incidents, the driver had stopped. He did not tell me what happened to those drivers. I drove the remaining 4 hours to Albuquerque as the sky turned gray, and then pale, and then the flat white of a desert morning. Both hands on the wheel the whole way, radio off. I thought about clean feet, about a glance into the dark that lasted less than 1 second, about the 10 seconds I gave myself by lifting my foot off the gas instead of braking, and everything I still have was living inside those 10 seconds. Some things are designed to look like help. The only way to know the difference is to look carefully at what doesn't fit, because the wrong detail is always there. You just have to give yourself enough time to see it. I coach high school football. I have stood on a sideline while 200 angry parents scream. I want to tell you what 8 months of being dismissed by the same institution looks like from the inside, and what they found in the Nevada desert when someone finally stopped dismissing me. My name is Ray Tillman. I'm 58 years old. I have driven Route 50 across Nevada 3 times a week for 19 years, hauling dry freight from Reno to Ely for a regional carrier out of Sparks. Travel writers call Route 50 the loneliest road in America. They are not wrong. Between Fallon and Austin, there are stretches where you will not see another set of headlights for 30 or 40 consecutive minutes. No cell service, no towns, no lights from ranches or farmhouses bleeding over the ridgeline. Just the white line and the dark and the sound of your own tires on clean asphalt. I know every mile of that road the way you know the hallway of your own house at night, without thinking, without looking, by feel alone. Every cattle gate, every reflective mile marker post, every place where the road dips just enough to put your stomach a half second behind you. My wife, of 32 years, packs me 2 sandwiches for every run. Jerky on wheat going east, tuna on rye coming back, because she says I need something to look forward to on the return. I have been looking forward to that sandwich for 19 years. That is the kind of ordinary my life is. That is who is telling you this. I first saw the car in February 2022. Westbound, somewhere between mile markers 117 and 121, a little past 1 in the morning. My headlights caught a dark sedan pulled onto the shoulder, and someone standing outside looking at a phone. I thought no signal, hoping someone stops. By the time I had cleared the car and considered pulling over, I was already a quarter mile past. I told myself the next driver would stop, or they would start walking towards Fallon, or a bar of service would come in and fix the problem. I thought nothing more of it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I saw it again. Same stretch, mile markers 117 to 121, close to 1 in the morning. Different car, lighter in color. Same posture, a figure standing on the shoulder, head down, looking at a phone. I slowed. I watched as I approached. The person did not look up, did not wave, did not step toward the road, just stood there, completely still, the way someone stands when they're waiting for something that is taking too long to arrive. I pulled over on the shoulder ahead of them and looked in my mirror. The shoulder was empty. The car was still there, but no one was standing beside it. I sat for a moment, then pulled back onto the highway. I told myself they had gotten back in the car. I kept driving. I kept watching. In July, I saw it again. I knew what I was going to do before my headlights even reached the car. I had dropped my speed a full mile back. I came through that stretch slow enough to read the plate clearly, letter by letter, number by number, saying each one aloud in the cab. I pulled over half a mile ahead and wrote every character into the notebook before I touched my phone. Then I called Nevada Highway Patrol Dispatch and gave them the plate and the exact location. I told them I had been reporting activity at this coordinate for 6 months, and this was the most specific information I could ever provide. The dispatcher ran the plate. There was a pause that lasted long enough for me to understand something had changed. The plate belonged to a 2018 Honda Civic, registered to a 29-year-old woman named Andrea Salcido from Sparks, Nevada. She had been reported missing 11 weeks earlier. Her car had not been located. The dispatcher's voice did not change in pitch, but it changed in pace. The words came slightly faster and more precisely placed. She told me not to approach the vehicle and said units were en route. I asked how long. She said 40 minutes minimum. I parked on the shoulder ahead and watched that stretch of road in my mirrors. I could see the Civic from where I had stopped, a faint, pale shape against the gravel shoulder. No one standing beside it, no movement on the road in either direction. I sat with the engine running and the radio off and both hands flat on my thighs. I did not move until the first set of emergency lights rose up from the east and spread across the desert. 2 highway patrol units arrived, then a third, then a Lander County detective who had driven 45 minutes on that same dark road to be there. They found Andrea Salcido's car. Inside were her wallet, her phone, a packed overnight bag, and a drive-through coffee cup from a place in Sparks with her name written on the side in marker. On the south shoulder, barely visible in the gravel, were tire tracks leading away from the pavement into the open desert. A search team went out at first light. They found Andrea Salcido 380 yards off the highway. She had been there for 9 weeks. I did not sleep for 3 days after that, not because of what I found, because of what I kept thinking about the 4 months before I found it. A detective named Vasquez called me 3 weeks later. She told me the investigation had connected 5 additional cases to that corridor of Route 50, going back 31 months. 6 women, all traveling alone, all on that highway. She said the cases had existed in separate departments and separate counties, with no thread connecting them until the location became a focus. My notebook, 8 months of dates and times and car colors and mile markers logged in a spiral pad in a truck door pocket, was the only documented record that a pattern existed before they had a name for what they were looking at. Without the plate number I read in July, Andrea Salcido's car would not have been connected to mile markers 117 to 121. Without that location, the tire tracks into the desert would not have been searched. Without those tracks, she would not have existed in the investigation at all. Vasquez said, "You are the only driver who ran this road often enough to see it more than once. Every other person who passed that shoulder passed it one time in their life. They saw a car and a figure and kept driving. They had no way to know what they were seeing was part of something. You drove past it 8 times. You wrote it down every time. You called when everyone told you to stop calling." She paused. Then she said, "That is the only reason any of this broke open." What I think about is not what they found in the desert. I have trained myself to think about that as rarely as possible. What I cannot stop thinking about is the sergeant's word, diligence. The door closing sound of it. The 4 months between my first formal report and the plate number that finally moved something. The 5 times I drove past mile markers 117 to 121, and someone was standing beside a car in the dark, and the only record that any of it was happening lived in a spiral notebook that no one in any official capacity asked to see until it was almost too late for it to matter. I still run Route 50. Turkey on wheat going east, tuna on rye coming back. I started a new notebook in August. I write down everything I see on that corridor between miles 117 and 121. Every car, every shadow that does not belong to the landscape. I have not seen anything since July, but I watch the same stretch of shoulder every single run. Both directions, same hours, same slow speed through those 4 miles. Because I understand something now that I did not fully understand before. The road does not change. The person who changes is the one who stops paying attention. Stories 1 and 2 are about what happens when you stop. This one is about what happens when you do not stop looking. There are roads in this country so long and so empty that no one sees what happens on them more than once. The only exception is the driver who runs them every single day and writes down what they see, and calls it in and gets told nothing is there, and calls again. If that's you, do not let anyone close that door. The most dangerous thing on a road with no witnesses is deciding to stop being one.
This happened in the fall of 2025 while I was on a sales trip through a small town in Missouri. I had spent the entire day driving throughout the northwest region of the state, visiting more than 60 sales leads. By the time I returned to my hotel that evening, I was mentally exhausted. Even so, I still had work to finish, so I spent several hours on my laptop scheduling emails to send the following morning. The hotel was a normal mid-tier place. It wasn't a chain, but it also wasn't a budget motel. It had a Western log cabin aesthetic and felt surprisingly cozy. From the moment I checked in until the following morning, I never saw another guest on my floor. That detail becomes important later. I was staying on the 3rd floor, which was also the top floor. Around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting at the desk typing away when I heard activity in the hallway. There were footsteps, a door opening, and a few urgent voices. I didn't think much of it. Hotels are noisy places. Guests come and go at all hours. About 15 minutes later, I decided to go downstairs to buy a bottle of water from the vending machine. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed a gurney positioned halfway inside a room 3 doors down. 2 EMTs stood in the doorway, while a man who appeared to be in his 60s lay on the stretcher. I couldn't see his face, only part of his arm and torso. Assuming it was a routine medical emergency, such as a fall or illness, I chose not to stare and quietly returned to my room. 10 minutes later, I stepped back into the hallway to finally get my water. This time, the gurney was completely in the hallway. One EMT was performing aggressive chest compressions, while the other stared at a portable heart monitor. I heard the unmistakable continuous flatline tone. That was the moment I realized the man was either dying or had just died. The EMT monitoring the machine firmly instructed me to return to my room, so I did. When I stepped inside, the clock read 12:18 a.m. Even after witnessing what had happened, my mind remained restless, and I continued working for another half hour before finally climbing into bed around 12:50. Only a few minutes later, I heard what sounded like 3 soft knocks on my hotel room door. They weren't loud enough for me to be certain they were even knocks. I assumed it was the building settling or plumbing noises, so I ignored them. Less than a minute later, I heard the exact pattern again. 3 knocks, but louder. I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. As I stepped away from the door, preparing to return to my bed, I noticed the handle slowly depress. Not violently, just enough to suggest someone was gently testing whether the door was locked. At that moment, a feeling came over me unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I stared at the peephole, but couldn't bring myself to look through it. Instead, my attention shifted to the strip of light beneath the door. The light suddenly disappeared. It looked exactly as though someone or something was standing directly outside my room. The darkness remained for several seconds, then the light returned. Immediately after, I heard a faint brushing sound against the outside of the door, almost like someone slowly dragging their fingers or the side of an arm across it. Then everything went silent. Despite legally carrying a firearm while traveling, I was frozen with fear. I had never experienced such an overwhelming dread before. I turned on one of the lamps and spent the next hour sitting awake in bed watching YouTube videos, hoping to distract myself. Eventually, I heard another noise in the hallway. The door opened. It sounded like it came from the same room where the EMTs had treated the man earlier. Then I heard someone quietly muttering to themselves. The words were too faint to understand. Feeling relieved that another guest was awake, I finally opened my door. A man was stepping out of that same room. He wasn't dressed like hotel staff or an EMT. Instead, he wore dark slacks and a white button-down shirt, like someone traveling for business. He appeared to be in his mid-40s. The only thing that stood out to me was his eyes. They looked unusually sunken, as though he hadn't slept in months. Curiously, I stepped into the hallway and asked if he had been with the man taken away by the emergency services earlier. The man turned to face me. After a couple seconds of silence, he nodded. He then stated that there had been 3 knocks, and that the third time was when they answered. I was confused, so I asked what he meant. A small smile crossed his face before he calmly replied that they didn't always leave immediately. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the stairwell. Needless to say, I got very little sleep that night. The following morning, around 8:30, exhausted and still trying to make sense of everything, I went downstairs to grab some coffee. I stopped at the front desk and asked the woman working there about the medical emergency that had just happened the night before. She looked genuinely confused and said she didn't know what incident I was referring to. I explained that paramedics had taken a man out of the room 3 doors down from mine and had been performing CPR in the hallway. As I continued explaining, she seemed more interested, but informed me that the room I was describing had been vacant. According to her, the last registered guest had checked out the previous day, and that guest had checked in alone. She also mentioned that the hotel occupancy had been unusually low the past few weeks, and that only a handful of guests had been staying on my floor, all of them at the opposite end of the hallway. She then asked me to confirm that the room I was talking about was exactly 3 doors down from room 312. That was when everything suddenly connected in my mind. The incident happened 3 doors away. My room number was 312. The knocking had always come in groups of 3. The mysterious man's first statement had been that there had been 3 knocks, and that the third time was when they answered. It was one of the most unsettling moments of realization I've ever experienced. It felt as though I was standing in the middle of something that simply didn't make sense. I spent countless hours trying to explain every part of what happened. Even though the front desk employee insisted nobody matching that man's description was staying there, she had only started her shift that morning. Maybe she simply didn't know who had been there overnight. Maybe someone forgot to tell her about the medical emergency. Maybe hotel policy prevented her from discussing it. Maybe the strange man was simply another guest who decided to play an incredibly cruel joke on me. Maybe the knocking had just been normal building noises, or the handle never actually moved, and exhaustion after a long day of driving and hours of staring at a computer screen caused me to imagine it. Maybe the hallway light briefly dimmed because of an electrical issue. I even questioned whether the entire experience had been some unusually vivid dream brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. But no matter how many explanations I come up with, none of them account for every detail. What bothers me more than anything is how everything seemed connected by the number 3. For nearly 3 weeks afterward, I wasn't myself. My mood was different, and if anyone asked what was wrong, I simply blamed work stress and a few personal things. If I really had been losing my mind, I didn't want this story to be the thing that convinced everyone else I had. Thankfully, as time passed, I was eventually able to move on for the most part, although I still don't like thinking about it for too long. I still travel frequently for work, and thankfully nothing remotely similar has ever happened again. In fact, the morning after everything occurred, once I finished speaking with the front desk employee, I packed my things and left the hotel as quickly as I could. While checking out, nothing else unusual happened. I even noticed several completely normal guests staying at the opposite end of my floor. Even so, ever since that trip, I've developed a strange habit whenever I check into a hotel. Almost without thinking, I immediately count how many doors separate my room from the stairwell, and pay attention to any room numbers or locations involving the number 3. Although the knocking that night always came in patterns of 3, it only happened twice. And that's the one thing I still find myself strangely grateful for. Because if I ever hear a third set of 3 knocks outside my hotel room door someday, I won't be sticking around long enough to find out what answers.
Aimed at me, and I did not blink once. The 11 minutes I spent watching a set of headlights go dark behind my parked car, engine running, nobody inside getting out, were the longest 11 minutes of my life. I want to tell you why. My name is Michael. I'm 52 years old. I teach physical education and coach varsity football at a high school in Pueblo, Colorado, and every fall since 2018, I have made the same drive east on I-70 to Manhattan, Kansas, to pick up my daughter, Kira, from Kansas State. It is a ritual. I drive out Thursday evening. We spend Friday morning at her favorite campus diner, where she orders blueberry pancakes she has ordered since she was 8 years old, and then we drive back to Colorado together. She sleeps most of the return trip with her head against the passenger window and her backpack in her lap. It is the most uncomplicated version of fatherhood I have found. October 2021 was the 4th time I had made the drive. I left Pueblo on a Thursday afternoon under a clear fall sky, the kind where the light goes flat and orange over the eastern plains before the sun is even close to setting. The land opened up past the Colorado border, and I-70 straightened into the long, flat emptiness of western Kansas. I have always found that stretch of highway oddly restful. Nothing to look at means nothing to worry about. I stopped for gas in Hayes around 9 o'clock at night. The Quick Trip lot was well lit and busy in the way that highway gas stations always are. Trucks idling at the pumps, a family in a minivan restocking snacks for the last leg of something, a woman walking a small dog in tight circles on the grass strip along the curb. Everything ordinary, everything where it should be. I bought a large coffee I did not particularly want, topped off the tank, and pulled back onto I-70 westbound just after 9:30. The traffic thinned immediately. By the time I passed the Collier exit, the highway was mine alone. 2 lanes and flat land, and the October sky pressing down from both sides. I had the radio on low, a sports talk station out of Salina that faded in and out depending on the grade of the road. The coffee was bad. The drive was ordinary. I was thinking about what I would order for breakfast the next morning when I saw the car. It was on its roof in the median, maybe 90 yards ahead. The headlights still on, pointing sideways to the grass, and the hazard lights blinking in a slow orange pulse. I pulled onto the shoulder. I sat for a moment with the engine running and looked at it. No other vehicles were stopped, no one walking the shoulder. The highway was empty in both directions as far as my headlights reached. I called 911 before I got out. The dispatcher said units were 22 minutes out and that I should stay in my vehicle. I said I was going to check for survivors first. She said she would stay on the line. I crossed the median with my phone flashlight. The dry grass crunched under my boots. The air smelled like cut hay and cold and nothing else. I got within 10 feet of the car and I stopped. I looked back at the highway. No skid marks on the pavement, no debris field, no scattered glass, no plastic trim fragments, no gouge marks in the asphalt. When a vehicle rolls at highway speed, it leaves a trail. This car had left nothing. The road behind it was clean. The engine was cold. I put my hand near the hood and felt nothing. The airbags inside had deployed and deflated flat, hanging over the steering column like wet cloth. I crouched and looked through the driver's window with my flashlight. A man was inside, suspended upside down by his seatbelt, arms hanging towards the roof. He had been in that car for a long time. This had not happened tonight. I stood up. I stepped back. I looked at the dark highway to the east. The headlights appeared from that direction while I was still standing in the median. One vehicle, moving fast, then slowing as it reached my position. It pulled onto the shoulder 50 yards east of my car and stopped. Engine on, no hazard lights. No one got out. The headlights pointed directly at my car, not at the overturned wreck in the median. I walked back to my car, got in, locked the doors, and told the 911 dispatcher there was a second vehicle behind me that had not approached the scene and no one had exited. She asked me to describe it. Dark sedan, I said. Black or dark blue, facing west, engine running, no movement. She said she was updating the responding units. I kept the phone to my ear and watched the car in my rearview mirror. It did not move. Its headlights did not move. 11 minutes. I watched the clock on my dashboard because I needed something to do with my eyes that was not the mirror. 11 minutes of a dark car sitting on the shoulder of an empty Kansas highway with its engine running and no one getting out. No one calling out. No lights coming on inside the cab. Just sitting. Just watching. Then it made a U-turn, slow and deliberate, crossing the center line, straightening up, and driving back east. I watched its taillights until they disappeared. It did not accelerate hard. It did not rush. It left the way something leaves when it has finished seeing what it came to see. 2 Kansas Highway Patrol units arrived 14 minutes later. I gave my statement on the shoulder, while a trooper swept the median with a flashlight. A 3rd unit arrived, then a 4th. The westbound lanes closed. I heard one trooper say something to another in a voice low enough that I was not meant to hear it. The phrase I caught was, "Not a crash scene." The investigating trooper called me the next morning while I was sitting in a diner in Salina, not eating anything. He told me the man in the car had been deceased for an estimated 36 to 48 hours before I found him. The vehicle had been reported stolen from Wichita 5 days earlier. There were no skid marks because the car had not rolled. It had been placed there on its roof. The hazard lights had been switched on manually. He said there had been 2 similar incidents on rural interstate stretches in Kansas and Oklahoma in the 18 months prior. A staged vehicle, a deliberate scene, a position designed to make a passing driver stop. In both of those cases, a driver had stopped to help. He did not tell me what happened to those drivers. He did not need to. I picked Kira up the next morning and we drove home. She slept against the window with her backpack in her lap the way she always does. I did not tell her what had happened until 6 months later. When I did, she went quiet. Then she said, "Dad, the second car, do you think they were watching to see if anyone stopped?" I said, "Yes, that is exactly what I think." She has not let me make a roadside stop alone since that conversation. She does not explain why. She does not need to. What I come back to on every drive I take now is a car placed carefully on its roof in a median with its hazard lights blinking, patient, positioned, built to look like something that needed help, waiting for someone decent enough to stop. The most dangerous thing on a highway is not the driver who means you harm. It is the scene designed to make you step out of your car to meet them.
This story mainly happened to my roommate Misty, but I was involved. All names except for mine have been changed. This happened literal hours before I'm typing this. My roommate, who I'll call Misty, had a boyfriend named Paul, whom I've met a couple times. And every time I met him, he seemed like a very chill, respectable, and actually kind of sweet guy. He would roll blunts for me and Misty because neither of us knew how, and we would talk about video games we liked. However, a couple of weeks ago they broke up, and according to her, it didn't end well, and she had to get a restraining order on him. Flash forward to 2 nights ago when I was playing SWAT 4 on my laptop, and I got the most normal sounding knock on my door. I said come in, barely looking away from the screen, when Misty slowly opens my door and says in a mumbled, quiet, and almost drunk sounding voice, "Paul broke my window and threw my clothes inside. Can you help me?" I could barely make out what she said, and I paused my game, got up, and came closer to hear her clearly. She seemed like she had just woken up from a deep sleep after drinking a bit, and she explained to me that her ex Paul smashed her window in and threw a bag of dirty clothes she left at his house. Mind you, she has one of those bunk beds that has a little office space underneath it instead of another bed, and it's right next to the window he smashed in. he knew exactly where she sleeps, so it was kind of scary to hear her tell me that. But I'm a bigger guy, and I know how to fight, and he's a skinny but kind of muscular man. But I wasn't afraid of him at all, and just scared for her safety, so I reassured her that I would stay up and call the cops and make sure he was gone. After calling the cops, I stood out on the porch scanning the parking lot in the neighborhood street, but I didn't see anyone. However, I couldn't shake that creepy feeling of being watched, so I told her to stay inside. About 45 minutes went by and no cops showed up, so I called the police department number to see if they were sending a car, and they said we were second on the call list and that it was a busy night for them, which tracks for the city and area I'm in. While waiting for the cops, Misty was getting texts from Paul saying things like, "Wrong move, bitch," and "I want my vape back," which she didn't have and couldn't find, so we think he was lying about that. It took another 3 hours for a cop to arrive, and it was 3 in the morning by that point, but the cop was nice and took all the info we could give him, and he said if he came back to give them a call, and that they would go to his address that they have on file because of the previous mentioned restraining order. Flash forward to yesterday, just before I left for work, and I had a gut feeling he would try to come back before I got home because I had to close at my job and it would be dark out. And at about 10:48 p.m., I got a text confirming my suspicion. The next bit of the story all happened to Misty as I was at work. At about 10:30, she left her room to go take some trash out, and when she looked back, she saw a dark figure walk into her room. Paul does have dark skin, but Misty is a little crazy, she will admit. And I do mean that with endearment, but she slightly brushed it off as her seeing things. But she still went and looked around the apartment for Paul or anyone who shouldn't be there, and couldn't find anyone. So she just sat down in her room and scrolled on her phone for a bit until she decided to get up and get some cleaning supplies from her closet. But when she opened the closet door, staring right at her was Paul with a blank expression. Misty said she went white with fear, but kept her cool and talked to him like normal, and asked what he wanted. In a dead cold voice, he said, "I just want my vape back." While she frantically but calmly, as to not raise suspicion, sent me these texts, by some miracle, 45 seconds after that text exchange, my manager said I could go home early since it was slow, and I bolted out of my job, called 911, and got on the bus. I told the operator everything that was happening, and by the time I got home, the police had already got him in cuffs. By then, Misty had left to go to a friend's house to chill out after that, but she told me everything that happened, and I was shook when she told me. When the cop asked me what happened, and when I got to her side, even his eyes widened, and even he was taken aback by the situation. He gave me another incident report, and said he's definitely going to jail. I'm happy my friend's okay, and shout out to her for being so calm and thinking on her feet, and shout out to my manager for letting me get off early. I still would have called 911 from work if I had to, but it was better for my anxiety to go home as that was unfolding. I had just moved out of home and started university when this happened. I was 18 years old at the time and living on campus in a small apartment. It was my first time living away from my family. The apartment wasn't anything special. It had a tiny kitchen, a small couch squeezed into the living room area, and a single bed pushed against the wall. Definitely wasn't luxurious, but I had made it feel like home. It was my first taste of independence, and I loved having my own space. One night, after a couple months of living there, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when my phone buzzed on the coffee table in front of me. I looked down and saw that somebody had added me on Instagram. The username wasn't familiar to me, but that wasn't unusual. My account was public, and random people would occasionally add me, so I ignored it and went back to watching TV. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed again. The account had requested to message me. I opened it and saw a simple greeting. I don't know who this person was, but I've never really been the type to ignore somebody trying to start a conversation, so I responded with a greeting of my own. At first, the conversation seemed completely normal. He asked how I was, what I was doing, and we exchanged the usual small talk. After a few minutes, though, the questions started getting strange. He wanted to know whether I was single, what my dream man looked like, and eventually what I was wearing. I remember sighing in disbelief. For context, I'm a gay guy, and that was openly mentioned in my Instagram bio. Because of that, random men occasionally messaged me asking weird or sexual questions. It wasn't exactly uncommon, so while the conversation was making me uncomfortable, it wasn't really setting alarm bells off yet. Then he sent me a photo of himself and asked whether I found him attractive. I opened the image. The guy looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He was heavily built with pale skin, messy brown hair, bright blue eyes, and patchy facial hair around his chin and upper lip. What stood out to me wasn't what he looked like, it was his expression. He wasn't smiling or posing. He was simply staring directly into the camera. I chose not to respond to the photo, and instead closed the conversation. Almost immediately, another message came through. This time, he repeatedly asked if I wanted to play Truth or Dare. I declined once, then declined again, but he continued pushing for me to agree. Around this time, my best mate Connor came over to my apartment. I showed him the messages and told him about the weird guy who wouldn't stop asking me to play. Being two dumb 18-year-olds, curiosity got the better of us. Connor laughed and suggested we just play anyway. Looking back, I regret it now, but at the time I was curious and already planning on blocking the guy afterward. I figured we might as well have one moment of entertainment before ending the conversation, so I agreed to play. I asked the first question. Honestly, I don't even remember what it was. It was probably something stupid. He answered before taking his turn. He asked whether I wanted Truth or Dare, and I picked Truth. As we watched the typing indicator appear, Connor and I joked about what he might ask. We expected something awkward or sexual. At that point, we were still treating the whole thing like a joke. Then his response finally appeared. Instead of asking a normal truth question, he casually asked how I was finding life at university. Neither of us said anything. I looked at Connor, and Connor looked at me. Then we both stared back at my phone. How did he know that? I never told him. I never mentioned attending university or living on campus. I had never met this guy before. That was the moment the entire conversation stopped feeling harmless. I originally came from a very small country town several hours away. If I had known this guy before university, I would have remembered him. But I didn't. I had never seen him before in my life. Connor and I spent the next hour trying to figure out how he knew that information. The problem was that there wasn't an explanation. I had never posted about university. I had never posted about living on campus. There was nothing in my bio mentioning it, and I barely posted at all. In fact, my most recent upload at the time was just photos of my hometown before I moved away. The campus also wasn't particularly large. I regularly saw the same students every day, so if he had attended the university, I felt like I would have recognized him. At that point, I blocked the account. Connor and I spent the rest of the night trying to come up with explanations. For the next few months, it stayed in the back of my mind. Every now and then, one of us would bring it up, and we would start trying to solve the mystery all over again. Eventually, life moved on, and over time, I completely forgot about it. Until 2 years later. By then, I was 21 years old. I had moved out of the university accommodation and was living in a house with Connor and 2 other friends. One night, I was sitting in my room when my phone buzzed. It was another Instagram notification telling me someone had added me. The username didn't look familiar. A second later, another notification appeared telling me I had received a message request. Thinking it was somebody who probably followed my TikTok content, I opened it. Once again, it was just of my own. The second I pressed send, a photo appeared in my chat. I opened it, and my stomach instantly dropped. It was him. The same pale skin, messy hair, blue eyes. There was absolutely no mistaking who it was. I quietly muttered in disbelief before muting the conversation and putting my phone down. I decided to wait until Connor got home so I could remind him about the strange guy from university. I completely forgot about the unsettling message that made me block him in the first place. If I had remembered it, I would have blocked him immediately. Unfortunately, an unrelated emergency came up later that night that completely distracted me. Since I had muted the conversation and barely looked at my phone afterward, the interaction slipped my mind entirely. It wasn't until a few days later that I opened Instagram again. As soon as I did, I saw his account sitting near the top of my messages. I opened the conversation, and my stomach sank when I saw there were countless messages. Dozens of them, maybe more. He had been messaging me non-stop for days. Some of the messages were sexual, others were angry, demanding to know why I wasn't responding. A few attempted to restart a normal conversation as though nothing happened. His mood constantly shifted between hostility and friendliness, making the entire conversation feel completely unhinged. Mixed in with the messages were explicit photos of himself. I took screenshots and sent them to Connor, who was at work at the time. At first, he didn't remember who I was talking about, but after I reminded him about the strange truth or dare conversation from university, it all came back to him. His advice was simple. He told me to block the guy immediately. As I was about to do that, one thought crossed my mind. How had he found me again after 2 years? None of my friends or family followed him, so there was no obvious connection between us. I wondered if he just remembered me all that time and deliberately searched for me, or was it somehow an unbelievable coincidence? I tried not to dwell on it. I blocked the account and changed my Instagram profile to private, figuring that if he ever found me again, at least he wouldn't be able to contact me so easily. Less than a month later, I was going through my TikTok message requests, something I almost never checked. Most of the messages were random, scammers, advertisements, and the occasional viewer from my live streams. One account caught my attention because it had more than 2,000 followers and had sent me a message about a week earlier. The message was just a simple greeting. Assuming it might be somebody I recognized from TikTok, I replied. Almost instantly, the account responded by asking whether I remembered them. I assumed it was someone I had met online and simply forgotten, so I admitted that I didn't recognize them. They gave me their real name and explained that we knew each other from Instagram. The name still meant absolutely nothing to me. I asked whether we had followed each other before. They explained that I had blocked them because they had been harassing me. The realization hit me instantly. There was no way. I asked whether their old Instagram username had been the same one I remembered from years earlier. A few seconds later, they confirmed that it was. I actually swore out loud in disbelief. One of my housemates heard me and came downstairs to ask what was wrong. I explained everything, and just like Connor, they immediately told me to block the account. Before doing so, I sent one final message demanding that they leave me alone and stop contacting me. Then I blocked them. By that point, this guy had somehow managed to find me on 2 completely different platforms years apart. My TikTok account didn't even use my real name, which made it even harder to understand how he had located me. That was the moment I seriously started wondering whether I was dealing with an actual stalker. I told myself that if he ever contacted me again, I would take things much further. A few days later, I met some friends in the city for dinner. Afterward, I caught the train home and started walking back to my house. The station was only a few streets away, so it was normally an easy walk. It was dark, the streets were quiet, and hardly anyone was around. As I walked while texting my friends, I thought I heard footsteps somewhere behind me. I stopped to listen. Everything went silent. I turned around, but the street was completely empty. I convinced myself I had simply mistaken my own footsteps for someone else's and continued walking. A short time later, I heard them again. This time, after I stopped walking, the footsteps continued for another few seconds before they stopped too. They definitely weren't mine. A knot formed in my stomach as I slowly turned around. This time, somebody was standing several meters behind me on the footpath, completely motionless and staring directly at me. A streetlight above illuminated his face. Instantly, I recognized him. It was the same man from the photographs. The same pale skin, the same messy brown hair, the same light blue eyes, and the same heavy build. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. We simply stood there staring at one another. Finally, he broke the silence by calmly greeting me by name, as if we were old friends unexpectedly running into each other. I turned around and ran. I didn't look back. It honestly felt like my life depended on it. Thankfully, my house was located inside a large residential complex. Once you entered the complex, my unit couldn't be seen from the main pathway because you had to turn another corner to reach it. I sprinted inside, rounded the corner, and practically crashed into my front door. It was locked. My hands were shaking as I desperately searched through my bag for my keys, all while staring toward the corner I had just come around. Every second, I expected him to appear. I expected to see a shadow slowly come around the bend. Finally, I found my keys, unlocked the door, and rushed inside before slamming it shut behind me. Connor and another friend were sitting on the couch when I burst through the front door. The second they saw me, they knew something was wrong. Apparently, my face had gone completely white. After I caught my breath, I told them everything that had just happened. Our friends immediately ran back outside, hoping to confront the man, while Connor stayed inside with me. By the time he got out there, though, the man had completely disappeared. There was no sign of him anywhere. We called the police, who searched the surrounding area much more thoroughly than my friend had, but they found nothing. They advised me to keep all doors and windows locked, to call immediately if anything else happened. They recommended that I begin the process of obtaining a restraining order against him. That all happened only a couple of weeks ago. I'm now in the process of getting the restraining order since I have screenshots of the harassment. I know his name, and I can accurately describe what he looks like to hopefully help identify him if necessary. Even now, though, I still wonder how he managed to find me after all these years, and across multiple social media platforms. I still wonder why he kept looking for me after I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with him. Most of all, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't turned around that night and noticed him standing behind me. Would he have simply continued following me without me ever realizing it, or did he have something far worse planned? I know I'll probably never get the answer to that question. What I do know is that ever since that night, I constantly check over my shoulder whenever I'm walking alone, especially after dark. I pay far more attention to my surroundings than I ever used to, and I can only hope I never see him again. If anything else happens, I'll provide an update. But honestly, I hope there's never another update to give.
वीडियोस बनाने हैं, फिल्मोरा है ना।